Maybe in some minutes you will have some rest, but you have maybe one of the best sessions of the day. This session is about something I shared this morning. I told, if you were at the beginning of this presentation, conference day, I told that making smart decision is a critical topic, not only for your personal life, but also for your professional career. And we have decided at the Human Advantage Conference to invite worldwide experts in this topic. And we are very happy to end this day one with Hilke Plassmann and Michael Platt. And I let my friend Ted doing his final moderation and introducing our guest. Ted, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. It has been a long day. We're in the final stretch. So, joining us today online, live from Philadelphia, we have Michael Platt. Michael is the director of the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative at the University of Pennsylvania. Michael has spent a long career looking for answers to some of the toughest questions in the world of neuroscience about how we make decisions and the role of social interactions, all with the goal of improving health, welfare, and business. Michael's the author of The Leader's Brain, a concise book that provides learnings and guidance on how leaders' brains work and how they can lead better. Beyond his book, Michael's written over 160 peer-reviewed papers. So thanks for joining us. I know it's a morning time for you, Michael. Good to see you.
Well, it's great to be here. Greetings from Philadelphia, where it's always sunny, and the Phillies have 4 wins to go to clinch the National League East.
A little bit of Phillies propaganda there. And here with us live in Paris, we have Hilke Plassmann. Hilke is the chaired professor of decision neuroscience at INSEAD's marketing department. She also serves as the principal investigator at the Brain and Spine Institute at the Sorbonne here in Paris. And Hilke's research areas are consumer decision making and its strategic marketing implications at the intersections of neuroscience, psychology, and economics. Her work has won a number of awards and has appeared not only in academic journals, but you've probably seen some of her learnings in some mainstream media as well. Michael and Hilke are often collaborators, and we thank you both for being here. Thanks, Hilke.
Yeah, thank you much for having me. It's a fantastic event. I'm so happy to be part of this. Yeah.
Great. So let's get started, both of you. We want to know how to make better decisions, right? A lot of today has been about doing better, and tomorrow is really going to be about that as well. In our business, in our lives. But this feels too big. It feels quite complex. Tell us, Hilke, where do we begin if we want to make better decisions?
Yeah, so here's how I got into what I'm doing today, right? So because the problem is that people, they say so many things, right? But then what they do and what they think and how they feel is often very different. And I think neuroscience and maybe even broader neurobiology is such a unique window into better understanding on a very mechanistic level on how our thoughts and feelings and emotions and behaviors get really implemented. Again, on this more mechanistic and maybe in that sense also less subjective level.
Yeah.
So I got super excited about applying this to help consumers to make better choices So what I specifically think is super cool is the idea of personalization.
Okay.
Because we often, think about segmentation,
Sure.
individual differences that can explain certain behaviors, right? But I think it can be extremely powerful to also look at the neurobiological level. So let me share a super cool story with you. There was this his name is actually Danny Cahill. He was a contestant in a weight loss show, TV show. I'm not going to say it now, right? So, but you know which one I mean, right? So he lost a lot of weight during the show, but 6 years later, he regained 50%.
Okay.
And then what was interesting, he's actually not the only one. So there was this article from a researcher from the National Institute of Health in the United States. He looked at the levels of motivation of all the contestants and how much they've changed their diets and how much they've changed their habit when
The
it comes
things
to
they've really
exercising.
implemented into their life.
Exactly.
Yep.
But none of this was really a good predictor of how much weight they regained or didn't regain. Only when he looked at into the neurobiological level, so the metabolism, physiological changes, how the brain reacts to foods, the reward system reacts or was affected by the intervention, then he could actually see and predict that this is also affected by a change in your behavior, and this is at the end of the day what helps you to be successful at keeping the weight off, right?
Okay.
So this whole notion about using neuroscience and neurofeedback to personalize, I think is super powerful, and that's something I'm very excited about in my research.
And in that case, some might look at that a bit simplistically and say, oh, well, those contextual changes that some might even call nudges weren't enough. There needed to be this kind of personalization on a neuroscientific level as well. What's that combination of kind of physical contextual change, the effort I'm putting in, I'm getting all the bad food out of the fridge, but there was another level needed, if I'm understanding you right.
Exactly, right. So because I think this whole notion about personalization and precision medicine, where I think this is the most commonly used, but you can think about precision business much more broadly, or precision well-being. That is fascinating because it allows me to also integrate the knowledge about individual differences in one's biology to make better nudges, to make better products, to make better interventions, right? And there are a couple of cool kind of, some people like to call them neurohacks, where you can use, so there are certain, tools, like you have these smartwatches, they give you an idea, they track your sleep, they track your physical activity, they track your heartbeat variation, right? And then they, some of them have this is very cool, they call it the body battery, and it tells you, should you now exercise, should you now not exercise, and
have
maybe rest better. Exactly, right? So, and even, in nutrition we have this too, right? So there's this super cool app from Tim Spector from UCL in London, where he kind of gets people through an app, an individual profile of their gut microbiome, of their blood, so of their fat and glucose metabolism, and then he gives really personalized nutritional advice, what you should eat or shouldn't eat to have a healthy lifestyle.
Great.
Right? So,
Great. So, we're talking about neuroscience kind of writ large. Michael, I want to turn to you. I was looking before we got into the session about who's online at the moment. We have quite a few business leaders in the audience today. Is it the same for leaders, or is there something specific or different about how decisions are made by leaders versus everyday punters like myself? I know you talk early in the book about emotions. We might think leaders are quite good at separating emotions from their decisions, or have we got it wrong?
Well, I wouldn't want to say that emotions are irrelevant or unnecessary or just get in the way. Emotions evolve for a very good reason, and that is because they help to provide a motivational coloring or tone that allow us to take quick decisions that that matter and that would help us, give us some advantage. In modern life, especially in the context of a leader in a business, that can be, that can get in the way of things. And one of the reasons why is that when your emotions are heightened, you have heightened arousal, you may pay attention more to the things you could lose than the things that you could win. And that can lead to both noise in the system. One of the things that we understand really concretely from the last few decades of work in decision neuroscience is that the way our brains make a decision is to sum up or integrate evidence over time favoring one option over another to a threshold that says basically like this is the best choice to make, or this is the most likely state of the world. If your emotions are high, if your arousal is high, that kind of just turns up the volume on the evidence accumulation process, which also turns up the volume on noise. Noise in the world and noise in your brain, and that can lead you to make the wrong decision, and just by virtue of that amplification of noise. And so that's one way in which emotions and emotional arousal can kind of affect the decision process in a way that you wouldn't really want. Another is by focusing your attention on what you might lose. And I think this is very palpable in the context of taking a risk. And so, Danny Kahneman, a long time ago, argued that why, in general, people kind of avoid some of those gambles when you might lose something, is that we feel the pain of losing more than we feel the reward, the pleasure of winning. And that's one idea, that's one model. There's another model that people prefer the status quo and don't like change. We've found that actually both of those things are true. So you can't tell just from choices, but if you look into the brain, there are some people who just focus too much attention on what they might lose, and there are other people who just kind of like just reject any option where they might lose something. But what we found is that attention to the losses, to the potential pain of losing, varies across people, and you can track that by tracking where they look. And so people who are more worried, more anxious, perhaps have a more negative affect, are more likely to attend to those things. And what's really amazing about that is that where we look, what we pay attention to, is a function of both what we're looking for. So if you're looking for what you might lose, what might really impact you, that's going to drive your attention. But it's also what the world looks like. And so we can change what the world looks like. And we've done that. And we found that if we make, for example, potential wins, the gains that you might accumulate, bigger or brighter, I mean, it's kind of silly. People are more likely to look at them. If they look at them, that gets turned up in their brain, that accumulates more, and they're more likely to actually choose the gamble, and almost erasing loss aversion. And so so it tells us that this is not really, it's both kind of a trait that you have, but it's also labile, and it depends on your current emotional state and the current state of the world, and it's manipulatable. We found that this translates to trading decisions too, where we know the endowment effect, this observation that something that you've got, it might be worth nothing to you when it's out there on the street, and then you get it, this classic, the coffee mug you would pay a quarter for, and now you won't give it up unless somebody pays you $10. We found that the exact same thing. I think it's very robust, and those are the ways I think in which being a little bit more measured, kind of calming down, taking your time, it allows better evidence to accumulate and kind of remove some of that bias from the decision-making process. There are other ways we can think about emotions too, social emotions, if you want, at some point during this conversation.
Yeah, I want to ask you kind of two questions based on what you just said. Some of these classical behavioral science, heuristics and biases, it's one thing to be told them and say, and it's one thing to kind of use them and manipulate in a lab situation, an experiment. But kind of a two-pronged question for you, Michael. What can a leader do to themselves, maybe to kind of minimize some of that loss aversion or see the upside gains, or, and for themselves? Are there kind of Jedi, B-Psi mind tricks they can do to themselves? And then how about imparting that to their teams as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things I would suggest. One goes back to classic work from Colin Kammer and Liz Phelps, looking at, these are people in the lab and they're in an MRI machine and they're making choices in a stock market. And if you say to them, like, attend to every win and every loss, it's kind of like your novice day trader, and they're just like chasing and making lots of bad choices, and they're not doing well. Whereas if you say to them, regulate, in essence, think like a trader. Like, I do this for a living. I handle people's money all the time. It's not what happens, moment to moment, but what, in the end, it's what happens in the long term. When people do that, they regulate. It turns down. It de-escalates all of that amplified noise and amplified attention to losses, and then people end up making better decisions. And so that sort of regulation, slowing down, taking your time, it turns down arousal. And I think that's what helps to make sure that you're relying really on evidence rather than on noise. And this, I think, points to another factor, which gets to that attention thing that I talked about before. As Hilke mentioned, we have very little, almost no access to the chatter, the 86 billion neurons in our brains, and certainly not the processes that are going on between them. And therefore, neuroscience gives us a window onto, what's going on in there. One of the few things that we can control, so I'm going to just put this out there, most of our choices are guided moment to moment by unconscious processes that we're unaware of. Your attention is something that you can control to a certain degree, right? And so as a leader, if you are in a situation where the upside is really important, what you can do is try to focus your attention on the potential good things, the potential windfalls, the potential things that could really make a difference for your company or your firm, and in that way amplify that information, and that can push you to make a decision that might allow you to, rather than just reject it out of hand. So attention is something, I think that's a very powerful force that we can control ourselves.
Yeah. So kind of regulation and focusing our attention. And I don't know if you saw on the screen, Michael, but about 55% of the people attending at the moment are leaders. They are leading teams. So let's kind of guide discussion towards how they can. So now they're going to regulate themselves, and they're going to think about their attention, where they're putting their attention. But a big part of a leader's job can be about motivating their team to be productive, to be innovative, to be creative, etc. What have you learned about how leaders can be more effective at kind of, helping their teams use their emotions in the right way, use their focus in the right way?
Well, there's a number of ways we can think about this. One very powerful thing to be aware of is emotional contagion. So, if a leader is displaying fear or uncertainty or anger, this can certainly ripple throughout a company or through an organization. And so that's another reason why this sort of regulation, I think, is very important. As human beings, we were wired to be social. I mean, just it's deeply baked into our DNA. I mean, I spend half of every day and my entire career studying the behavior and neurobiology of monkeys who share all of this decision-making circuitry with us, and they share the sort of underlying tuning in to social information. And so, the people who work for you, the people that you lead, they're going to pay a lot of attention to you, right? And so what you say and what you do will potentially have a big impact. That's number one. The second is that, and I think that we're now at a real crossroads. So you think about it, if I look back at the history of the last 100 or more years, in business, we've transitioned from a muscle economy to an information economy, and now a relational economy, relationship economy, in the context of AI and automation. And so I think putting great emphasis on social connection in the workplace, providing opportunities, physical space, time, and a cultural mandate for the people you manage, the teams that you manage, for them to actually be able to do the things that create strong connections amongst them. And that can help to not only increase trust and communication amongst those teams, but I think, again, make them more open to kind of trusting the leader and really listening to what they're saying, and in that way acting on those directives. And we can talk a little bit more if you want about how a leader can make that happen.
Yeah, I want to go there. So Hilke, any thoughts on how a leader might then communicate with their teams? If we're trying to set the right emotional tone, we're trying to, keep people focused on the business task, but keep people, long-term within the business, the people that we want to keep. Any things about how leaders can communicate to disseminate that down? How might they persuade or influence the organization and its employees to be aligned on a strategy or a direction of travel?
It's a very interesting question. So I think, there are lots of persuasion techniques, right? But what I think is even more important also as behavioral scientists, what we appreciate is to create a certain context for them to be motivated, right? Mm-hmm. And that means through their communication skills, through how much they acknowledge efforts, how much they are transparent in their decisions, but mostly how much they actually, provide an atmosphere in a team that has psychological safety, which I think you had a roundtable about this morning. I think that is super important, specifically, if you're in a high pressure workplace, if you want people to be creative and to be motivated, helping them to say, okay, look, here's a safe space. You can share what you think. That helps in crisis, and that really helps in very competitive environments to be a good leader. That helps the team to be motivated.
Yeah, and I saw from our Spark Up poll, there were words there that our leaders were saying that they find difficult, and motivation was the one that was really, motivation, delegating, increasing comprehension, being inclusive, kind of creating adhesion to the strategy. We've talked a little bit about motivation. Anything else there that's jumping out at you, and any communication tricks or tactics you might have for leaders to?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe Michael has an idea. But I think for me, the most important thing is to be, very clear in your communication, have good communication skills, show appreciation for your team, but also be extremely transparent in your communication, right? And I think that, again, helps with this environment where people can be motivated and can be creative and can come up with solutions to problems.
Yeah. Michael, any thoughts there as you see the words come up? Delegating is difficult for leaders, keeping teams motivated.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about here, but I want to riff off what Hilke was saying and bring up this concept of synchrony, which has become a real hot topic over the last 10 years, which is this observation that when we have rapport with someone, our brains begin to synchronize, to resonate, which indicates that kind of the pattern of my brain and Hilke's brain, we're good friends, would be more similar. So that means we're kind of seeing the world in a more similar way. We're feeling more similarly about it. And that's going to lead us to be more likely to work together and engage in collective action. Higher synchrony predicts greater trust, better communication, collaboration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like a lot of really good things. And so I think that there's two things that I would say here. One is that leaders can take advantage of that, because one of the things that we've learned is that what a leader needs to do, especially if they need to get their teams to hear something difficult and to execute on that, is what the leader needs to do is kind of synchronize their audience's brains to their brain and to each other, so that basically, different people show up at work differently each day. Like somebody had a rough night, somebody else was in, traffic, or they had a problem with their kids, or they had a great night. And so they come up in a different state. And so what a leader needs to do is kind of like get them all into alignment first before saying, conveying the message about what, that's the sort of delegation part, I guess, in some ways, that part of communication. And that's where the charisma comes in. That's where storytelling comes in. Storytelling seems to be a great way of getting people in sync together. And that means they're more likely to all hear what you're saying in the same way and understand what they need to do together. And that synchronization benefits, in terms of how a leader communicates, benefits from being clear and being simple and straightforward. So the sort of complex, talking in a very complex way, too long, those things can certainly get in the way of synchronizing that audience. And that audience, by the audience I mean, the people you manage or the teams that you lead. The second point, I want to get back to psychological safety, which Hilke brought up. And we know it's critical for team dynamics and successful team performance. We published a paper a couple of months ago in which we measured heart rates between people on teams. They were actually on kind of faux hiring committees, and this was hundreds of people. And just as our brains synchronize when we have good relationships with people, that percolates down to some of our body processes, especially when we're emotionally in sync. Our hearts begin to beat together. And what we found, and this was a really hard task, so people had to evaluate candidates for a job, and there was a lot of information. some of which was unequally distributed amongst committee members. And what we found is that those committees that were physiologically synchronized were more likely to reach consensus and made a better decision, made the right decision. Whereas those committees that were not in sync with each other physiologically, either never reached consensus, or they kind of took the default route or listened to the loudest person, in the room, and then thereby failed to make a really good decision. And none of that was predicted by subjective self-report ratings of, how much do I like the people on my team, how safe do I feel, et cetera. It was really, the power was in the physiology. And to us, what this really suggests is that this heart rate synchrony, physiological synchrony in general, we could consider a biological marker, a biomarker of psychological safety, the conditions that must be met amongst a committee that allows people to more effectively share information. And this was cool for us too, because we were a little worried that being in sync might lead to groupthink, and it was exactly the opposite. Because making a good collective decision requires feeling, first of all, recognizing something that somebody else doesn't know, feeling safe and confident enough to introduce it into conversation, and then having a robust discussion. And if those conditions aren't met for psychological safety, then basically people fail at that task.
That's fascinating. I mean, can you manipulate that physical synchrony?
Yeah.
Are there ways that you can?
That's
Can you play music? Can you? I don't know.
Yeah, you can. And so that's what's great. I mean, first of all, some people are just in sync from the get-go, from the moment they meet.
Physiologically.
You can predict who's going to become friends. The great work of Talia Wheatley up at Dartmouth, Carolyn Parkinson. So they've shown that you can predict friendship based on kind of whether you, like just watching a TikTok movie individually, if you have more similar brain activity to somebody else, this predicts you're more likely to become friends. We showed actually a very similar thing for people in the office. This was a study we did with one of our corporate partners, Slalom, last year. And these were people who never worked together in the same physical location. And yet we found that the more in sync they were, the better their working relationships and the consequences downstream for productivity. So yeah, the big question is, what can you do to get in sync faster? Especially for agile teams that are coming together temporarily and disbanding.
Hybrid teams or remote teams, yeah.
Remote teams. So there's a lot of things out there. This is where neuroscience can really help too. And I think when I talk to leaders, they're like, "Why should I trust you in this prevention?" And I'll say, "Well, look, we evaluated in terms of the science. Like, if you're going to spend time and money and energy on something, you should do it on this one because it really works." And so there's been a number of different interventions that seem to synchronize physiology. One of the most important is conversation. So when we actually have a deep conversation, not just sort of chit chat, but we give time for give and take, speaking and listening. And there's structured sets of cards, for doing this. Something called Fast Friends, for example, developed by the Aarons in the 1990s. There's other ones you can get online. When you do this, you move into synchrony between people who don't know each other, don't work together very often, and as they do that, then that leads to enhanced trust, collaboration, communication. Then there are other things too, like moving together, like rhythmic activities, mirroring behavior, like you do in improv theater warm-ups. That gets people in sync.
I promise I won't make Hilke do a miming routine with me now.
Yeah, we can try.
Music. So the rhythmic, the rhythm of music. And especially if you're involved in it, so drumming, singing, chanting. And this is why I think this is so fundamental, because if you look at, I'm an anthropologist by original training.
Okay.
If you look at every culture on the planet, they all have these social rhythmic activities they engage in. Singing, dancing, chanting, whatever. And that seems to be for a reason, right? And that reason, we think, is to turn up synchrony, which is the glue that allows us to work together to overcome challenges that we normally wouldn't be able to do. So I think it's just super fundamental. And in fact, it's not uniquely human. You see it in monkeys, you see it in mice, you see it in social bats. So it's an age-old primordial mechanism in our biological heritage that gets us moving together, allows us to cooperate at higher levels than we could otherwise.
Hilke, how do we make this happen in a business? You know, what is the way in? We talk so much at BVA about what's the way in for behavioral science. Is it through marketing? Is it through human resources? Is it through learning and development? How do we bring neuroscience into the business?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to do this. I mean, the obvious one is marketing and measurement, but I don't think this is a promising one. I think the most promising one is, you know, to integrate this into new product development with this personalization effect that I mentioned in the beginning. But also, so I have this elective on neuroscience for business that I teach at INSEAD for our MBAs. And so I invite people that actually have done a business based on integrating neuroscience. And one that I really liked is called Pymetrics. And this is for human resources, since you seem to mention that. And so the CEO, Frida Polly, what she has done, so she has an MBA and she has a PhD in neuroscience. And she said, okay, well, I want to change recruiting, how recruiting is actually done. And what we're going to do is to test for people's soft skills. It's not about, you know, whether you're an expert in an area, but it's, you know, this what we just have been discussing, whether you will be a good team member, at some point be a good leader. So she's taking different tasks from neuropsychology and people, so she calls them games. People play those games, and this is then her assessment. And what is so cool about them is that they're so much less biased towards gender or race than other tests that we typically do. Right? And she has a huge success, so she then, you know, applies AI models on all this data that she has, and I think that's a very cool application for human resources that I think works actually very well.
Yeah. Great. As you both know, tomorrow at the Human Advantage, we are focused on artificial intelligence. Any thoughts on, you know, what you know from neuroscience and the work that you do in your labs, but also the work you do with your corporate clients? You know, any thoughts on how we guide leaders and organizations to make better decisions, the topic of our chat today, but utilizing AI? Any opportunities, any watch-outs? I don't know, Hilke, we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the thing is that neuroscience and artificial intelligence, they are sister sciences, right? So because computational neuroscience, you know, has a lot of links. Exactly, right? So, but then at some point, artificial intelligence decided, okay, we're gonna, you know, remove the characteristic of our models that they have to be biologically plausible, right? But so where do I see that they can you know, work better together? I think, you know, I think that neuroscience can help AI to become smarter, right? Specifically when it comes to integrating more complex, you know, processes such as emotions and so forth. One very cool startup that I also worked with, it unfortunately never took off, but so they had this notion that for self-driving cars, if we could build in back actually human intuition, which is in some ways is unintuitive because we want self-driving cars
to
because
be smarter than us.
to be smarter than us. No, but I mean, think about you drive in Paris or London, right? So the algorithms that are in place right now, they will fail. They will let the car stop all the time because you see all these millions of people, but you and I, we're very good at reading people's intention. Will this person cross the street or not, right? What's
She's
going to
stopping
do?
and I'm going to keep going, or
Exactly. So and they were using a theory called signal detection theory to build into these algorithms to make them smarter. Right? And I think that was very powerful for me on how you can, you know, use neuroscience to make smarter AI. So.
Michael, your thoughts on opportunities for neuroscience to, you know, neuroscience, I guess the marriage of neuroscience and AI for better decisions for leaders and businesses?
I mean, we're doing that right now, and in the context of marketing, for example, where we have actually creating models, these fusion models of deep neural networks that can look at, for example, an ad frame by frame and decode everything about the visual and auditory information, and then we take EEG data, which we're scaling up in a way that we can deploy in business, I think, very effectively. And we take those signals and merge them together to create an engagement of the latent variable, in essence. And that latent variable is incredibly predictive in terms of sales, impact,
Comprehension, motivation, purchase intent.
investment on stock price and stock returns. So, and I mean, ultimately, it's the brain data that does most of the heavy lifting. And certainly, with regard to any kind of self-report. So that's one way in which they're fusing. We're going to see the merger of humans and technology. There's a lot to worry about, of course. We need to do this in a responsible way, in a moral way, and I think center human values within that context. And so that's a concern, and that's a deeper conversation that will take longer.
Yeah.
But the thing I want to point out too, and look, former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers, I think, said it very well, which is that AI is coming for your IQ before your EQ. The intelligence of these systems is already almost superhuman. They're getting better at EQ, so many people relate. For example, in certain contexts like in healthcare, so people will rate AI feedback as more empathetic and caring and patient. And that makes sense because, when you go to the doctor, most of the time they're typing into your electronic medical record, not paying attention to you at all, and they can be kind of infinitely patient. But it's that EQ, the things that are so different about humans. There are many similarities between AI and human brain in terms of, the kind of underlying algorithms in some ways. But in other ways, the human intelligence, natural intelligence, is so very different. It's not a computer. A better metaphor is a Swiss Army knife. So we basically have a set of tools, like a knife and a corkscrew, which is the most important, screwdriver, and those evolved to solve fundamental problems a long, long time ago. And in fact, most of those tools evolved 30, 50 million years ago, right, to solve the problems that all primates had to solve. And I think that's where we recognize that, it's not a general purpose device. And so these tools, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, how we evaluate risks, etc., they need to be kept sharp so they can do their jobs. And so if I were a leader, that's where I'd be putting my focus on, especially because, and so a lot of the things we talked about here today, that's really important, especially the social dynamics and emotions, because rightly so, many people are terrified. They're terrified because they see potential job loss or disruption or dislocation, and it's happening at the speed of light. And our brains evolved to track things that move the speed of a woolly mammoth and that change on the course of seasons. And so this is, your expectations can't be too high for how the human at the center of this is going to respond. And so I think that's really important too. Like ultimately, if you replaced all the humans, who's going to buy your stuff?
Yeah.
So, it's like ultimately that's a failure.
Until AI becomes consumers as well. Thank you so much, both of you. This has been really helpful. I just want to pop up on the screen. If you're hungry for more, you want to learn more from Hilke and Michael, they are hosting another event coming up in November with some other interesting and really kept.
Not 24.
25 and 25. You've got time. You've got a year. But some really interesting speakers for a big event coming up next year. Thank you so much both for joining us at the Human Advantage. Thanks, Michael. I know it's morning time for you, and Hilke, thanks for popping down.
Well, thanks for having us. It was a pleasure.
Great to be here. Thank you, Hilke.
Yeah. See you soon. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Great.
Okay.
We're coming to wrap it up, so Eric, over to you for a few final words.
Okay, final words will be very simple. We are already at the end of the first day at the Human Advantage Conference. We do hope that you have learned a lot, like us, and maybe you have been inspired. And again, Ted is there to tell you something about the day 2, because we are only at the middle of our event.
That's right. It's only halftime for the Human Advantage. We're going to get a little rest. I think you owe me a drink. We're going to have some
Maybe
dinner. But we want to see you here tomorrow morning. We are starting at 8:45 a.m. Paris time for the second round, the second day. We're going to focus, as we just mentioned with Hilke and Michael, tomorrow's all about artificial intelligence. Eric's going to get a little bit of a rest tomorrow. I have a new co-host with me tomorrow morning, Emily, who you'll meet tomorrow morning. And we're going to start off with a keynote that you're not going to want to miss with Professor Olivier Sibony. So We'll see you tomorrow for day 2 of the Human Advantage. Thanks for being here.
Bye.